So this is quite a famous diagram capturing one conception of how information travels through your head. So you start off with sensory input, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and then it ends up in sensory memory. And sensory memory is a very short-term storage. If there's a flash of lightning and you close your eyes and there's an after image, that's a form of sensory memory. If I say something to you and you hold the last words in your head, that's sensory memory too. And sometimes if somebody says to you, well, you're not listening to me, and then you could kind of reach back and parrot back what they said, even if you really weren't listening to them, because some of this acoustic sensory memory exists. What you attend to ends up in your short-term memory or your working memory. And memory, this is, of course, short-term memory that is not somehow rehearsed or understood, gets quickly lost. You could hold things in short-term memory through what's called maintenance rehearsal. So if I give you a phone number, 520-688-9056, you could hold it in your head, 520-688-9056, 688-9056, and you could walk around holding it in your head like that. Some of the stuff then goes on to long-term memory, and long-term memory is storage for a long duration. And the connection between working memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory goes both ways. Stuff from short-term memory could end up in long-term memory, and stuff that's in long-term memory could end back up into working memory. To some extent, many psychologists identify working memory with consciousness. And so working memory is your experience of what things are, of how the world works. Now, the most obvious way in which long-term memory and short-term memory differ is their storage. Long-term memory has virtually unlimited storage. Every word you know the meaning of in every language you understand is in long-term memory. All of these faces you recognize, every story, every joke, the plot of every TV program, all of the various episodes in your life are all stored in long-term memory. It has to have a limit because long-term memory is part of your finite brain, and finite things have a limit. But people will never reach that limit. Short-term memory, in contrast, has a very limited storage capacity. So here it goes. Don't cheat. I'm going to give you a list of numbers. 14, 59, 11, 109, 43, 58, 98, 487, 25, 389, 54, 16. So try to remember them. You could try to rehearse it in your head, frantically repeating the numbers, but it's actually too long to do so. And unless you somehow incorporate this into your long-term memory, you're going to lose it. It's going to slip away. In fact, the storage of short-term memory has been described by George Miller as 7 plus or minus 2. It's sometimes called the magic number, which means it ranges from 5 to 9, depending on a person and depending on the situation. Now, a perfectly good question at this point is 7 plus or minus 2, what? And the answer is chunks. And chunks are basic memory units. And your knowledge of what counts as a unit, what makes a single thing, determines how many chunks something, a display or a list can break down into. You get more efficient at packing information into chunks as a result of learning. So take this example. Suppose you don't know anything about French and you get the string of letters Lamation. Well, if you just try to remember each letter separately, that's 8 chunks, and you're pushing the limits of short-term memory. On the other hand, you could break it up into 4 English words. La, ma, is, on. Let's pretend la and ma are English words. Now it's 4 chunks. But if you know French, it's la maison, the house, and now it's a single chunk. And in general, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that people's memory gets better as they become experts. Football coaches have an excellent memory for football diagrams, architects for logical floor plans, and chess players for chess patterns. So if you don't know anything about chess and I show you this, it's impossible to memorize. It's a bunch of figures in an arbitrary location. But if you do know chess and the pieces fall into a logical, sensible configuration, maybe this is the 15th move of the Fibonacci attack. I just made that up. I don't know anything about chess. But if it makes sense to you, you could glance at this and memorize it. Not because your short-term memory is more powerful in general than a non-chess expert, but rather because you break this down into a single chunk. And so how much you store into your consciousness critically depends on your knowledge.